This week we are reading from Bo, the third Torah portion in Exodus. And we come to the final 3 plagues in the preparation to leave Egypt. At the end of the portion we are taught some of the early basics of the Passover story that we are to retell. And one of the ways that we are commanded to honor this upcoming redemption from slavery is a commandment to wear special ritual items on our heads and on our arms. In Exodus chapter 13, the text says, "It will be a sign upon thy hand and for frontlets between your eyes, for by strength of hand has God brought us forth out of Egypt." So what is the text talking about? Why are we being commanded to remember this event with signs on our hands and between our eyes? The rabbis of the Talmud discuss this commandment, which occurs elsewhere in the Torah, and they decide that the proper way to observe this mitzvah, this commandment, is to wrap ourselves in tefillin. As modern Jews steeped in rabbinic tradition, we follow their interpretation. And ritually observant Jews from across the denominational spectrum wrap themselves in tefillin every weekday morning at services or at home. So we notice first that there is a box for the head, and that goes like this. And there is a box for the arm. I'm going to take a second and wrap this. And there are these 2 boxes. And inside the 2 boxes, there are 4 paragraphs of Torah text. 2 from Exodus and 2 from Deuteronomy. We wear these tefillin, as we are taught, to remember our deliverance from Egypt. One of the more fascinating aspects of the tefillin are the actual scrolls inside. Both boxes, the head and the arm, contain the same 4 biblical paragraphs of text. Only the box on our head has these 4 paragraphs written on 4 different parchments, stuck into 4 different chambers. But the box on the arm is one long continuous parchment with the 4 paragraphs written upon it. So why is the construction of the tefillin parchment different? Why is the one in the head different than the one in the arm? And moreover, how can this help us remember the Exodus from Egypt? So one interpretation is really quite beautiful. The box on the head is divided into 4 chambers, teaching us that the mind needs to divide and compartmentalize, distinguish, and discern. This is intellect. Our brains are not a simple repository of fact and fiction. It is a machine that categorizes information in such a way that allows us to engage in an intellectual process. We can think and dance and play music, learn a new language, talk on our cell phone while driving a car, all because the mind knows how to categorize the ebb and flow of information. The tefillin box on the head reminds us of the importance of division. But the tefillin box on our arm, closest to our heart, only has a single scroll of parchment. The heart requires continuity, connection, and closeness. This is our soul. When we speak of our soul, we often point to our chest. Our heart, then, is synonymous with deep affection and spirituality. As human beings, we don't operate effectively if our heart is fragmented and pulled in many different directions. Our heart longs for that which unifies and is durable. And so we place a single parchment in the tefillin box closest to our heart. The dual characteristic of the tefillin ultimately represents our exodus from Egypt. Jews need to intellectualize the redemption from slavery. It's part of our history to read through the texts, to pore over rabbinic commentaries, to gather together each year at the Passover Seder, to retell the story. We search for ancient Egyptian texts to corroborate Jewish enslavement, and rabbis and scholars speak about the universal versus the particular elements of the Jewish freedom story. This is our intellect at work. All of these activities are essential and fruitful. They engage our minds. But we also remember the Exodus story not as an event to be rationalized and compartmentalized. Rather, it is a story to be internalized. The idea that Adonai heard our cries, remembered the covenant with Abraham through Moses. God redeemed us from slavery. This lifts the soul and gives us spiritual direction. We are reminded of the Exodus each time we lay tefillin, each time we drink Shabbat wine, each time we celebrate Shabbat. The Jewish soul is eternally grateful to God for its freedom. Because I was a slave in Egypt, I have a fresh perspective on how to treat people who are oppressed. Because I was redeemed, I have an obligation to redeem others. The Exodus from Egypt is not just a story to be understood by the mind. It affects my individual behavior. And it affects my belief as a Jew. It affects my sense of Jewish communal worship, my sense of tzedakah. The Exodus from Egypt was a pivotal event in the history of the Jewish mind and of the Jewish heart. The act of binding oneself in tefillin, with its 4 chambers in the head and 1 scroll near the heart, is a reminder that Jews are eternally bound up in the service of God, with our hearts and with our minds. Now go out and be Torah.